Hello there everybody, Sabana92 aka Nightmare, and welcome back to the house in Fata Morgana, with significantly less audio this time because I noticed in editing that some parts of the music did drown out my commentary, so good news is the game should be a little bit lower. If I need to lower it a little bit more, I will do my best in post-editing. But anyway, so we finally got started on some of the extra stories. We got to see a little bit more of a glimpse with Jacopo in the third tale from the first game. And we saw that technically, in a way, Jacopo and Giselle certainly have a little bit in common, actually. And we got to see more of Morgana's perspective in Jacopo's dream world, and saw how much he was torturing himself. And like I said, and it's pretty obvious it's such a tragic set of circumstances, you know? But damn, there's a limit to how much one person can torture themselves for their mistakes. Especially considering just how badly everything turned out. Alright, let's examine pain. Is this part of Jacopo's story again? Beyond ending 4, a moment of hesitation. Oh! How can you be sure that even now I still love you? Can you deny the possibility that I no longer yearn for you, but the white-haired girl? Can you deny the possibility that my love for you has transformed into hate? Farewell, Michelle. In a brief moment of hesitation, Michelle had abandoned Giselle. Oh, I know where this one's... Oh! We're actually seeing those! Oh my. In a brief moment of hesitation, Michelle had abandoned Giselle, leading to the worst possible outcome for the both of them. The both of them, and one other as well, a young girl. The girl, however, remained oblivious to her fate. Are you sure you really wanted to let him go? The girl leaned back in a rocking chair before the fireplace, tracing her bottom lip with her skeletal finger. Her face was covered in hideous scars, a fitting look for the witch of the accursed mansion, but it was her devilish smile that left the strongest impact. Oh! The maid, who now remembered she was Giselle, was putting kindling on the fire. A task she had done countless times over hundreds of years. But this time, the circumstances were slightly different. Yes, I am sure. Giselle looked up at the witch, distraught. Her already unnatural pale face was almost entirely devoid of color. Just moments earlier, she had banished the man she loved. She had cast Michelle's soul back into the void, sending it off with a wish that he would never find his way back to this mansion. I see, the witch said, still running her finger across her lip. I don't think I'll ever understand. If you hate someone, you should chain them down and torture them for all eternity. 'Twas the perfect opportunity to trap his soul. I do not hate him, Giselle said, causing the witch's bony finger to come to a sudden halt. The witch raised an eyebrow, perplexed, but it was hidden in the shadow of her hood for no one to see. Oh, is that so, my dear? After everything you said, I simply assumed. I could never come to hate him. I could never want to see him dead or tortured. As she spoke, the look of dejection on Giselle's face deepened. However, there seemed to be a hint of relief beneath it, which the witch couldn't comprehend. Oh? Then why did you say what you did? The witch extended her skeletal finger toward Giselle. Giselle sighed, saying, I don't think you would understand. Sometimes you kept your distance from someone because you loved them. You sent them back to the mortal realm to live a normal life away from you. An undying apparition because you loved them. You never wanted them to set foot in the cursed mansion again because you loved them. The witch would never understand those desires. She would never understand telling someone, I don't love you, because you and she would never understand lying to push someone away because you loved them. Probably not, the witch said. I'm not particularly interested in understanding either. It doesn't matter what happened in the interim. In the end, nothing's changed, has it, my dear? You are still my darling, devoted maid. With enough time, you will once more forget your name. Giselle slowly closed her eyes. The witch was right. In time, the mansion would eat away at her until there was once again nothing left. However, she no longer felt any fear about losing herself again. Giselle had no one to wait for anymore, which meant she was free from having to despair about him never showing up now. She didn't regret her choice either. As she had shown Michelle the events of her own past, she had come to realize that she was no longer that person, that she was merely an unsettling shadow of the woman he had known, and she didn't want to subject him to that. It's for the best. Giselle repeated that phrase to herself again and again. A devilish smile rose to the witch's lips as she watched her gaze slowly sink to the cold floor. What a wonderful world they see, she said. She was in complete control of everything, after all. The cursed mansion existed outside reality, an eternal prison where time held no meaning. What one soul perceived as a day could be a second, or a year for another soul. The witch Morgana awoke from a long rest. She opened her eyes, and there was the fireplace crackling away. Before it knelt a woman with deathly pale skin, feeding the fire with kindling. Morgana had no idea where the maid got the wood. Oh. Hello there, good morning. The witch snorted. Oh, that was her. Good morning to you as well, my dear, Morgana said. How long has it been? Since when? Since you cast him out. Cast who out? The maid said with her usual smile, tilting her head, which was all Morgana needed to hear to know what had happened. It's been long enough for you to have fully reverted, I see. Whatever do you mean? The maid asked. Oh, is this one of your riddles? When have I ever given a riddle? You're the one who likes to make everything you say sound mysterious, my dear. My. If you say so. Are you trying to agitate me? Of course not. Now, would you like to start your day with a cup of herbal tea? Morgana sighed. It seemed the maid had indeed fully reverted. She'd had this exchange every single time she woke up since the maid's mind had broken. And even though her own sense of time had dulled as well, having to answer the same questions over and over again was still frustrating. She was the one who had broken the maid's mind in the first place, though. So she also understood she had brought this on herself. I've told you this again and again. I don't need any tea. And what about breakfast? The maid asked. I don't need food either, as I've also told you repeatedly. The maid pursed her lips into a little pout. Any food or tea you prepare is nothing but the product of a deluded spirit's imagination, and I would cast myself into the void before touching that, the witch thought, sighing. Then will you be doing your usual rounds of the house? The maid asked. I suppose, the girl said, gazing up at the dark ceiling. Her only real pastime was visiting the three souls trapped here and tormenting them. Sometimes with words, sometimes with visions of the past, and sometimes with her own two hands. Gradually, bit by bit, she chipped away at their souls. As the master of the house, it acted to serve her will, and that influence was especially powerful while it existed outside time, which meant she could do almost anything she pleased. And she had taken full advantage of that ability to torture the souls of the flaxen-haired boy, the beast-like swordsman, and the monstrous lord. She was more than willing to spend the rest of eternity exacting her revenge on the three of them. That said, she felt things were getting a bit repetitive, and with Michelle banished, there was no longer any hope of outside entertainment, which left her the only one with the power to mix things up. It might be time to send them out again. The maid blinked at her, perplexed, but of course she wouldn't understand. She didn't know about the three souls imprisoned here. Are you going to release something from the mansion? The maid asked quizzically. I would never. the witch said, cackling. They've been placed under a powerful curse, a wish of destruction and reconstruction. And I'm going to begin that process again, have them live their third lives. Oh, I can't wait to see what terrible ends they meet this time. Aren't you excited, my dear? Yes, very much so, the maid said, smiling as though she hadn't understood a single word. The witch jumped to her feet, giddy with rancor, imagining the miserable, bloody futures the three terrible men would surely meet had fixed her mood an instant. They had to suffer for all eternity. They had to endure a fate worse than death. They had to pay for their sins. Over and over and over again. Morgana first went to visit the flaxen-haired boy, whose soul was imprisoned in the rose garden. As she approached the double doors, they opened on their own, the rusty hinges letting out pained shrieks. On the other side lay a colorless, withered garden, a sad shadow of its once brilliant, colorful splendor. Of course, the witch felt no heartache over the garden's state of decay. A boy's shadow knelt on the ground, almost entirely encased in a briar patch. It was wispy and barely managed to retain its human form. Arms wrapped around his head, he muttered endlessly to himself. It's not all my fault. I can't take this anymore. Someone, get me out of here. Morgana stuck her chin out, looking down on the pathetic creature before her. Her last time here, he had been a bit more coherent, but now he seemed to be hardly there at all. The flaxen-haired boy's punishment was to relive the day that started it all, over and over again. He had to watch dozens of people die during the Harvest Festival celebration, including his own sister. And now that he'd finished his second life as well, she'd made him watch his mistakes from that as well. Such as the time he called his sister disgusting and pushed her away. The very same sister he betrayed the Lakeside Witch for. I never could have known that would happen. I just wanted a normal life. Someone, please, get me out of here. Would you like me to set you free? The witch asked. Only then did the shadow notice her presence, looking up at her with his featureless, empty face. What? The witch's smirk grew wider. I said I'm thinking of releasing you. If the flaxen-haired boy had any strength left to think, he would have realized this was all a trick, not a sudden display of kindness. But all he could see was an opportunity to escape, and he was going to take it. But please, let me go. He didn't even so much as wonder why. The only thing that registered in his feeble mind was the word free. Nothing else mattered as long as he could escape this place. The witch's devilish smirk widened even further. Very well. Then I shall deliver your soul to its rightful place. You are very fortunate to have this chance to return to the mortal realm, my dear. Thank you so much for your forgiveness. A contorted smile rose to the flaxen-haired boy's face. He then whisked away into nothing, leaving behind only a small breeze to rustle the witch's robe. It took all her strength to not burst out laughing. Thank you for your forgiveness! Oh, that was brilliant. She hadn't said a thing about forgiving him. Farewell, Mel, the witch said, tracing her lip with her bone finger. Oh, we'll meet again soon, she said. The witch's parting words this time were not, until our souls cross paths once more in the boundless sphere of fate, because she hadn't released him from the curse, so his fate was still bound to her, even as he began life anew. And so long as he remained subject to the curse, so did the soul of the girl who meant so much to him. Oh boy.
Oh boy.
Next, the witch went to visit the swordsman. His soul was imprisoned in the cellar from which the stench of blood and flesh emanated. After losing his mind, the twisted killer began destroying everything in sight while howling in some incomprehensible tongue. Perhaps his native language. Perhaps not a human language at all. The witch was, in truth, not looking forward to this visit. While the cursed mansion was indeed her domain, her own little realm of the dead, she was still just a regular soul herself. If he were to catch her off guard, he could very well damage her soul beyond repair. The witch held the greatest grudge against the barbaric lord, but she remained the most cautious around the swordsman. With an exasperated sigh, she opened the cellar door. And exactly as she expected, a barely humanoid beast leapt at her the second she did. "Stop this instant!" she shouted, pointing a bony finger at the beast. In the realm of the dead, it was willpower and not physical strength that ruled, which meant that while the witch had been a helpless girl in life, she was the most powerful being in this domain. At her command, the beast froze mid-motion, a katana held high above his head. He stared wide-eyed at the small girl standing before him, beads of sweat forming on his neck. The beast shouted something in some inhuman language. The witch glanced around the cellar. It was littered with corpses, bloodstains on every surface. Perhaps among the bodies was even the woman he called his tether. The witch turned her golden eyes back to the beast. In life, she had been terrified of this man, so scared that she had resorted to opening her door for the flaxen-haired boy, hoping to ask for his assistance. But now there was no fear, only glee at having him entirely under her thumb. "How would you like it if I returned you to the realm of the living?" she asked with a devilish grin. The beast stared at her blankly, his form shifting into something faintly more human. "You're still torn between your two greatest desires, aren't you? You thirst for blood, and yet you crave a quiet life at the same time. You've already fallen once, lived as a beast, but that wasn't enough to satisfy you. So perhaps the only way to quench your thirst is with the other desire, peace and quiet. And I'm offering you another chance to have that."
Do you mean it?
The Shadow's hands were trembling. It took the witch everything in her power to not start cackling at the sight. That abhorrent killer shaking like a lamb. "Yes, I mean it," she said with a smile. The katana fell from the beast's hands, letting out a loud, high-pitched clang when it hit the floor. Hard the floor. As the sound echoed in the cellar, it sounded almost like 1,000 ghosts screaming. "So you do want to go back to being a man after all?" The Shadow dropped his head in a crude imitation of a nod. A hideous beast and his most benevolent savior. It was a scene that could have easily taken place between him and the white-haired girl in his second life. Of course, the witch's intentions were nothing like hers. And by the witch's mercy, the beast was freed. With his disappearance, the countless bodies stacked up in the cellar vanished as if they had never been there. Only the smell of blood remained to remind her of the carnage. The witch then burst out laughing, unable to hold it back any longer. "Oh, that was brilliant. Do you really think you'll ever be able to find peace? No, you'll just kill whoever holds you back and descend into madness, no matter how much you resist. And this time, you're going to turn everyone on you and die a sad, miserable, gruesome death." Her cackling echoed in the cold cellar for some reason. Well, here it comes. Her final stop was to see the man she despised more than anyone, the Lord. That monstrous savage. The mere thought of him filled her head with a pitch-black rage. He had ruined her life and tainted her soul. He was the cruelest, most barbaric of them all. "You rang!" "No, she's talking about me right now." He held disgusting blood sabbats, turning a saint into a spectacle. The witch despised all three men, but her loathing for the Lord, the ultimate root of her suffering, was far, far greater than the other two. She made her way to the den on the second floor. Cigarette smoke seeped out into the hallway, a smell as sad as the man waiting inside. When she opened the door, a cloud of smoke escaped, and only then was she able to see inside. Sitting on the edge of the billiards table with his head drooped was the third Shadow, again barely able to maintain a human form. A few seconds later, he noticed the witch's presence and stumbled off the table, shuffling precariously towards her. He extended a hand for her in grief and overwhelming regret, but the witch only saw it as a threat. He was trying to hurt her as he had done so many times in life, to save himself. "Don't you dare touch me," she said, causing his hand to freeze in the air. It formed the chasm between them, boundlessly wide and unfathomably deep. One he would never be able to cross. "Rejoice, Lord," the witch said with a devilish grin. "I'm setting your soul free." The Shadow just stood there staring at her. He didn't rejoice at the news, and in fact seemed to be rather upset by it. He opened his mouth to try to say something, but only strained gasps escaped from his lips. The witch tilted her head. The other two had been thrilled to hear they were being set free, so she was not expecting this reaction. "Ah," she said with a nod. I see what it is. You realize that was a trick and that I'm really sending you out to your third doom. I suppose being the Lord for so long, you would need a sense for danger. The man was desperately trying to communicate something to her, but with each attempt to use his voice, it only got less and less comprehensible. If he couldn't speak, then he would have to try something else. So he dragged his legs forward toward the witch. You will never lay another finger on me, she commanded, pointing a skeletal finger at the shadow's feet. Heavy black chains, strongly reminiscent of those that had been used to seal the observation tower's door, appeared from the floor and wrapped themselves around his ankles, digging deep into his skin. The shadow fell to his knees, and the sound of rattling metal echoed in the den. Oh, what a sorry sight. The former lord of a large territory and the head of a mafia family, on his hands and knees, utterly hopeless. How does it feel being looked down on by a mere commoner? It must be absolutely humiliating. The shadow screamed, still mostly indecipherable, but more so than before. His intense desire to get through to her was beginning to show an effect. The witch cackled, glaring down at the pathetic creature before her. She knew how prideful a man he was. He was undoubtedly trying to assail her with curses and promises of vengeance. And oh, how delightful it would be to completely break him. Go on, my dear. Tell me how much you despise me. Take it nice and slow. You can do it. She crouched before the shadow, peering into his eyes. He didn't have a face to read an expression from, but she could still feel his desperation. He groaned and grunted until finally he was able to form words. I want to make amends. The witch froze. It took her several seconds to comprehend what he just said. Had he just asked to make amends? The Lord, the man who had held those dreadful blood Sabbaths, tortured slaves for fun, and was concerned only about satisfying his own desires, wanted to atone? For what purpose? I made you into the witch. I will do anything you want. I want to make amends. Shut up. The witch stepped back away from the Lord. She was rattled and her face contorted in confusion, luckily hidden by her hood. Right. This was just a ploy to escape from her curse. He was offering atonement in the hope that she would show him mercy. Well, he was a fool. She had no mercy to spare. The only thing she had in her heart was boundless hatred. Having regained her composure, the witch decided she would make him pay for attempting to worm his way free with an empty show of grace. She turned her gaze towards the shadow-cloaked ceiling and made a wish. In her mind, she envisioned the longsword the Lord had held above her head, and a few moments later that very blade descended from the void. The time-worn sword rattled to the floor beside the Lord. Raising her fleshless arm, the witch pointed at the blade with a smirk. If you wish to atone for what you've done, you will have to suffer the same pain as I did. Take the blade and with it sever your own left arm. And should you refuse, that proves you a heartless tyrant only capable of hurting others. She meant to say, but couldn't finish. What? The sound spilled unbidden from her lips as a massive shadow made a thump against the dense carpet. Jet black liquid spurted from his left shoulder, staining the area around him. He hadn't even hesitated. What next? The shadow plunged the bloody sword into the ground, leaning against the hilt for support. He was breathing heavily from the pain, but still he asked for more, knowing a single arm didn't compare to the agony she had been made to endure. The witch stared at him, flabbergasted. What on earth was happening? Was this the kind of man the Lord was? No, forget that. Regardless of whatever he was doing now, he had still locked her in the observation tower and killed her. He was a brutal, savage murderer, and nothing had changed that. He had to be. He had to be. What do you want me to do next? What will bring you relief? Morgana. Silence! The witch's mind was a mess. Something seemed wrong, but her soul refused to let her see what. Pain that she had long since buried was drifting back to the surface. As anger and hatred bubbled furiously in her gut, she twisted her lips into a smile and proclaimed, "Very well then. As you wish. I'll let you experience the full extent of the pain and helplessness I was made to suffer." And so she put the Lord through all the pain and suffering and despair she had gone through in life, covering his body in wounds from head to toe and draping the den in a thick layer of black blood. It was the witch's very own blood sabbat. The black shadow lay in a twisted mound in the center of the sea of blood, occasionally straying to gurgles, the only sign anything remained inside. He had endured the entirety of her 16 years of life in the tiniest fraction of that time, and as a result, his soul was on the brink of disappearance. The witch was breathing heavily as well. In the process of administering his punishment, she had to relive it all as well, creating brand new wounds on her soul. It had been centuries since she had last been hurt by her past. "That's enough," she said. "I'm sending your soul back out into the world so you can begin your third life and your third tragedy. I will never let your suffering end." Coughing up blood, the shadow lifted his head, shaking it weakly. He didn't object to the suffering, only doing it in the mortal realm. It had to be here, with her where she could see it. He had so much he wanted to say, but only the strength left in his lips to put one sentiment into words. That he wanted to atone, of course. That was the only thing he truly desired. The witch bit her lip. These incomprehensible feelings he kept dragging out of her were driving her mad, and the very fact that she was unable to retain her composure was only a source of further agitation. "Are you incapable of saying anything else? If you're capable of feeling remorse, why would you do any of that to me in the first place? Why did you hold all those blood sabbats? Why did you make a spectacle out of me? Why did you torture your slaves for fun? Why did you call me a witch? Why did you lock me up and murder me?" He likely wanted to tell her she was wrong, but because not everything she had said was false, he couldn't. And he didn't have the strength or clarity of mind to explain it in detail. So all he could do was cling to his self-destructive wish for atonement. "I will never be able to understand you, Lord." The witch's mental state was beginning to shift again. Not for the better, though. The only person capable of untangling the massive knot that had formed was no longer around, which meant it would only continue to get more and more tangled. And she was starting to think she'd rather be rid of him entirely than have him suffer for all eternity. The longer she kept him around, the more chances he would have to beg to make amends. But she was done with that. She was done with the Lord's nonsense, and she was done with feeling like such a mess because of him. "Okay then, as you wish. This wasn't part of my plan, but I'll let you have your final atonement." As she spoke, she bent down and picked up the sword with her skeletal hand. "By giving me your head." He didn't object, and he didn't try to run. Instead, he pushed himself up with his right arm, dropping his head and exposing his neck for her. Morgana looked down on him with disgust. She tightened her grip on the sword, pretending not to notice the faint trembling in her hand. "Farewell, Lord. May your soul be forever extinguished from this world." With those words, she ended the Lord's life once and for all, and with his death, the truth scattered into the wind. It's very interesting that we're actually seeing, like, a sort of epilogue to the other bad endings. It's very interesting, actually. Morgana's robe was heavy with black blood. She was exhausted. She thought having her revenge would take a huge weight off her shoulders, but instead she just felt lethargic. She wanted to get back to the warmth of the fireplace and go down for another nice long sleep. But when she opened the door to the hallway, "Have you finished your business?" She came face to face with the maid, her jade eyes glimmering unnaturally. Morgana took a half step back. What was she getting spooked for? She was the most powerful being in this domain. She was in complete control. The witch gave a little to mask her momentary stumble, then said, "Yes, I've finished. Now tell me, is the fireplace still going? I'm rather tired and would like to rest." "But of course, Morgana. I put fresh kindling on the fire not long ago. It should be nice and warm for your nap." "Very well." Morgana lowered her gaze and made to leave the maid behind. But then she realized something seemed very wrong. How does the maid know my name? A chill ran down her back. If the maid's mind was still broken, she would never call Morgana by that name, because she believed it to be her own. Cold jade eyes remained affixed on the golden. A smile spread across the maid's lips. The witch could not, though. Are you Giselle? If so, why? Why would she pretend to be mad if she still retained herself? What was her objective? To take over? Why was she wearing that unsettling smile as if she was Giselle? Who on earth was she? For the first time, she felt something like fear for the maid. For Giselle. She was the witch, though. She was supposed to be the one everyone else feared. She was the master of the house. She was the most powerful being in this tiny domain. So why did she feel like Giselle of all people had taken the upper hand? She had to have been imagining it. Giselle was her faithful maid, and she was the all-powerful witch. However, that dynamic only existed as it did because Giselle had Michel to wait for. Her one source of hope and her weakness. But now that he was gone and Giselle no longer had any hope, would she really stay in Morgana's servitude for eternity? While you were asleep, I spent some time organizing my thoughts. Is that so? The witch said. It is. After Hayden's death, you told me of the 3 men who wronged you, and of your enmity for them. That may have happened, yes. And then you told me how you made a wish for them. A wish that they would undergo reconstruction and meet their tragic demises again. Yes, what of it? Something about it doesn't quite sit right with me. I've only heard the events from your perspective, though, so I can only speculate on what it means. But a story told from one perspective is necessarily colored by that perspective. If the speaker believes something, it becomes true within that telling, regardless of the reality of it. I'm quite familiar with this phenomenon, as I have fallen into its trap before. What are you implying? Are you trying to say I'm wrong about what happened to me? I cannot say. I'm the only one who is no longer with us. Any chance we had of knowing the truth is now lost forever. However, unlike you, I was there with all 3 of them for their second lives. And in particular, my impression of the man in the 3rd door, who you referred to as the Lord, does not line up with your depiction of him in certain ways. Would you really call him a heartless monster? Why wouldn't I? The witch said. He passed goblets of my blood around to noblemen like wine. Does that sound like someone who has a heart? Giselle didn't back down in the face of Morgana's intense glare. In fact, she took another step closer. Morgana was starting to feel like she was at a disadvantage, despite full confidence she was right. And what if you were mistaken about some fundamental detail? Mistaken? No, there was nothing to mistake. The Lord was a monster. He was one who, when he drained her blood for feasts, and he was one who, when he locked her in the tower. That was the simple truth of it. Why then did she feel like her chest was in a vice every time she told herself that? Why had her hand shaken before killing him? And why on earth did her mind keep imagining him begging to atone as someone completely unrelated? For a heartbeat, a vision of that lonely graveyard swelled up in her mind. Standing there was the slave man whose name and face and voice she had long forgotten. The one who had taught her kindness. I chose not to stop you, though, Giselle said. And why do you think I did that? Enough games! Out of that already! What are you scheming? Oh, I would never. I simply wanted one thing. For you to lose everything as well. The witch glowered at Giselle, who was still wearing the same lonely smile. She had no idea what that inscrutable woman was trying to say. She had already lost everything. That was what had driven her to become the spiteful witch in the first place, drifting outside time for all eternity. Giselle placed a hand on the witch's cheek. Jade and golden eyes locked, mere inches apart. And there, the witch gazed into the eyes of another witch. You surrendered yourself to hatred, becoming a witch who brandished curses. And I surrendered myself to solitude, becoming a witch who brandishes desolation. This is a world too painful to live in if you don't love solitude, after all. No, there's only one witch, me. And why might you think that? Because I'm the one who started it all. I'm the one who created this mansion, and I am its master. I bear more hatred than anyone. I'm the one. As departed souls, we are formed by our will and our emotions. How do you know my despair, sorrow, and solitude aren't stronger than the hatred that makes you? And then, with an unsettlingly cold smile that radiated pure emptiness, the smile of the true witch, she offered the girl one final thought. Can you be certain the Lord you killed was the same Lord? And with those words, that tiny, insignificant realm became devoid of even pain. Damn! There's a terrifying thought when Giselle becomes an even more terrifying kind of witch. Damn. That was interesting, though, seeing a different side there. Like, that was like an extending of one of the bad endings, but it was very interesting because, in a way, Giselle... Damn. I never even factored the possibility that Giselle herself would become a witch. A witch of desolation. Shit. Damn. Boy meets girl. Boy meets girl. Michel was bored out of his mind. His family had always been very overprotective, but at the age of 10, he was still afforded a lot of freedom. He wasn't quite old enough to start acting like an adult yet, and in light of what fate had in store for him much later, this would turn out to be one of the happier periods of his life. Even as a child, Michel understood his place within the Bollinger family. He was obedient and did his best not to step on anyone else's toes. But bottling up his desires for so long put them at risk of blowing up. Especially on days like this, where there was an opening. His mother, who said, "Listen to your mother," as though it were part of her breathing, just so happened to be out of the house. So he wanted to do something different, to let out all his pent-up boredom. He wanted to make this into a day he would remember. And since his mother had taken many of the servants with her, there was no one to get on his case if he acted out a bit. However, he had no idea what to do with this newfound free time. He was just drifting past him, every passing moment another moment wasted. I'll just have to ask Georges. He may have been a precocious child, but Michel was still a child nonetheless. And he genuinely believed his brother would have some idea of what to do. He might be painting again. If his eldest brother Didier had been around, Michel could have gone to play chess with him or watched him train, but regrettably only his eccentric middle brother was home. 10 days earlier, Georges had proclaimed he was going to paint a masterpiece. Michel hadn't seen him since. Maybe he was dead. That would kinda suck. Michel didn't want to have to deal with reporting a body. Though in all seriousness, his brother was probably just in his special place, and had lost track of time. Michel made his way to his brother's room, a process that would usually involve running into a half-dozen servants. But today, the Bollinger estate was quite as a graveyard. He felt like humming as he walked through the corridors, but couldn't think of any songs. If only he wasn't so ignorant about the arts and recreation, maybe he wouldn't be such a horribly boring person. But today, Michel wasn't in the mood for those kinds of depressing thoughts. Avoid that! He stood before the door to his brother's room, knocked timidly, and then let himself in. Hey, Georges, do you have a... He said, but he was unable to finish the sentence. His brother was splayed out on the floor like a corpse. He really had found a body. Michel stood in the doorway, frozen and useless like one of his brother's sculptures. The air in the room was stale from having been closed for so long. Georges! After several long minutes, Michel was finally able to use his voice again. He ran over to the body and dropped to his knees, shaking his brother's shoulders on the verge of tears. This was his punishment for saying it would suck having to deal with a dead body. Georges, please come back to me. What happened? The corpse lurched forward, causing a breeze that stunk of paint. Michel shuffled backwards on his knees, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it would jump out of his chest. Georges gazed stupidly at his in-progress painting, heaving a heavy sigh. Are you okay, Georges? Maybe you should get some rest. Didn't see you there, Michel. Michel wanted to disappear. He felt like an idiot for getting so worked up over someone only to have them see straight past him. That's all you have to say? After worrying me like that? Huh? I was sleeping. Nothing to worry about. Your bed is for sleeping, not the floor! Georges chortled. Did you need something? Oh, yes, Michel said. Mother and most of the servants are out of the house for the day. There's some kind of trouble? No trouble. Huh? Georges tilted his head until it was almost horizontal. Actually, wait a minute. Let me try that. And my neck popped. Ow! Oh. Okay, that kind of hurt. Okay. Pro tip, don't do a Georges. A few moments later, he clapped loudly and said, "Aha! So you're bored!" He was right, but Michel couldn't bring himself to just say, "Yes, I'm bored, please give me attention." So he averted his eyes and said instead, "I would not say I am bored, but it's just so rare for the house to be so empty, and I..." Georges chuckled. "Ah, you're right," he said with an impish smirk. Michel braced himself, fearing his brother was going to tease him. "We all need a change of pace every once in a while. Some real excitement to mix things up. I've been running short on inspiration these last few days, too." So he was not ready for what his brother had said instead. "Let's go out on the town," Georges proclaimed, at which Michel went positively bug-eyed. Now, this is a point that bears repeating. Michel's family was very overprotective of him. In part because he was so sensitive to the sun, but mostly because he was a daughter of noble blood. He wasn't a vampire, so the sun wouldn't kill him, but because of the circumstance of his birth, he was almost never allowed to go into the city. That's right, That's right. If he was lucky, he got to go down once a year, but always for some kind of business. The city was like a giant cave filled with gold and jewels, but guarded by a big, ferocious, poisonous dragon, and he could only ever see a little bit of it. So he was thrilled. So much so that he had been raised with fewer hawks watching over him. He probably would have broken into dance, and maybe even a musical number. But he knew how to restrain himself, and restrain himself he did. Okay, so this is basically another glimpse of to Michel's actual past before... Okay. When they arrived at the capital's central district, it was much busier than Michel had expected. There were people everywhere, going every which way, doing anything and everything and even more. Someone was shouting from a shop, trying to attract customers. "Oh, you fucking slag, get over here! We got some fresh cabbages!" I have no idea where the hell that came from. Their voice was rough, and deep, and loud. Nothing like the quietly refined voice of everyone at home. A cat sat perched atop a barrel covered in filth, glaring at Michel with eyes that seemed to glow. His mother would probably hate this. Her anxiety was too strong. She would say it was too loud and unrefined, refusing to even set foot here. But Michel thought there was beauty specifically in the discord. Georges laughed merrily at the sight of Michel looking around in wonder. "Looks like we're in for even more excitement than we bargained for," Georges claimed. Is it not safe here in the city?" "Ah, heck no it ain't! You let your guard down for 3 seconds and you're dead meat. Don't listen to anyone who says they have something good for you. Hear me? 9 times out of 10, they're gonna toss you in a big black cauldron and eat you right up. That's just how it is in the big city." Michel went pale as a ghost, and 3 seconds later, Georges burst out laughing. He'd been tricked. Michel flushed bright red. His cheeks were getting quite a workout today. "If there's anyone I shouldn't listen to, it's you, Georges." "I ain't lying, just playing a little joke, that's all. Only a little kid would fall for that." "I'm gonna pour Tabasco on your face as you sleep." One of these days, Michel was going to get Georges back, beat him at his own game. "This," his brother said, giving him a quick wink. "This is the excitement I was talking about." He placed an outstretched finger on Michel's chest, right above his heart, and pushed gently. "There's gonna be some real fireworks if anyone realizes who you are." He was right. Michel's mother would tear his head off if she found out her daughter was wandering around town in commoner's clothing. He wore a battered brown robe instead of an elaborate dress, and his hair was tied up and hidden inside a hat. At a glance, no one would clock him as a noble girl, but he still felt awkward and out of place, and people were more likely to notice that. Georges, meanwhile, had done this before, and he really owned the commoner look. I mean, this is Georges we're talking about. He could probably pull it off real easily. If Michel didn't know better, he would think his brother was a traveling troubadour or something. "You really are a strange man, Georges." "You just now figuring that out, kid?" "No, just... that's part of my charm." "I hope one day I can be as confident as you." Georges was probably the only person in that house who considered trouble fun. If Michel had asked one of the servants to help him sneak into the city, they would have certainly taken off running, shouting about how they didn't want to lose their head. As a Bollinger himself, Georges would likely be allowed to keep his head, but even he wouldn't get off scot-free for this. Michel was glad he had Georges here with him. He didn't say that, though. partly from embarrassment and partly because he knew he'd be teased about for it. So, where should we go? Want to hit the pub and grab some cheap booze and toss silver at the bard? Maybe we should ease into things. That's a lot to start with. It's not like I'm taking you to a monster's den. Just relax, it'll be fun. A pub is still no place for children. Come on! I may be a dunce, but I'm not dumb enough to take you to some seedy back alley joint. Most of the pubs along the main road are basically restaurants during the day. Some even have inns in them. There'll be lots of very nice people. If you say so. Michelle was less comforted and more terrified at the prospect of there being lots of people. But part of him was still interested. Not to mention, he wouldn't be going alone. So he gave a hesitant nod. If you're scared, you can always hold my hand, Georges said. Forward march, my young soldier! Follow my lead! Michelle wasn't happy about his sprightly, air-headed brother playing them like a fiddle, but this was a battle his pride couldn't win. Holding onto his brother's pant leg, they set off down the bustling street together. But not for long. Michelle stood flummoxed in the middle of the street. He looked left. No Georges. Right? No Georges. Had he gotten lost? No way. He'd been right there just moments ago. There were just too many people around and he lost sight of his brother for a second. He wasn't lost yet. Michelle was better than that. He would never get lost. But his pride couldn't change reality. They were on their way to the pub when Georges had run into a girl he knew and started talking. It didn't seem like they were going to finish anytime soon, so Michelle decided to wander around and explore the area. One thing led to another, and now he'd completely lost sight of his brother. Refusing to accept that he was lost, Michelle started chasing after people the same height and build as Georges. When one turned out to be wrong, he went after another, and another. And before he knew it, he was well off the main road with no idea how to get back. This area was much quieter than the main street. Not being familiar with cities, Michelle couldn't tell if it was a good kind of quiet or a bad one, though. Maybe he just wandered from the trade district to the residential one. Or maybe he'd ended up in some back alley where no one could hear him scream. If the latter, he needed to get out of there and fast. Back alleys were the home of ruffians and other unseemly types, after all. Hey, I take offense to that. And who knew what they would do if they found out he was a noble? That, compounded with the fact that he was too shy to ask for help and too self-conscious to let himself be seen crying or even shaking, left him stuck there just biting his lip. Why did none of my books say what to do when you get lost? And soon enough, he was directing his frustration at innocent bystanders. But then he caught sight of a stout woman around his mother's age watching him intently. 9 times out of 10, they're gonna toss you in a big black cauldron and eat you right up. George's words played back in Michelle's mind. He knew it was a lie, and the woman appeared rather friendly, not at all like a child-devouring witch, but Michelle was all alone right now, so everyone seemed dangerous. It was like a high-strung cat. Michelle glared back at the woman so she knew he wouldn't go down without a fight, and as soon as they locked eyes, she spoke. He couldn't make any sense of what she said, though.
My, look at you two little sweethearts, shopping together. You're so grown up.
What? 2 little sweethearts? Was she trying to disorient him by spouting nonsense so she could kidnap him while his guard was down and demand a ransom from his family? Hey, mister, came a voice as something tugged on his robe. He spun around to find a small girl looking up at him and sucking her thumb, evidently the source of the voice. Who are you? She asked. No, who are you? He stared at her, flummoxed for the second time that day. Oh? My daddy got lost, the girl said. I think you mean you got lost. Are you lost too, mister? No, it's my brother who's lost. We're the same. My situation is nowhere near as bad as yours, thank you. Michelle listened to what the girl had to say, doing his best not to explode at her. She was apparently 3 years old and had gotten separated from her father while out shopping. His hands were full enough trying to figure out what to do with himself. The last thing he needed was to have to look after a lost toddler on top of that. He really shouldn't have asked the woman for help as soon as he'd noticed her. Or he really should have asked. But by the time he'd collected himself enough to do anything, she'd already said goodbye and disappeared. Unable to find her again, Michelle was stuck dealing with the calamity all on his own. He couldn't just leave her there either, as much as he didn't want to deal with it. He was the older one here, and he had to set a good example for her. So Michelle bent down to match the girl's eye level and said, "Let's get you home. I'll help you find it." Can you remember anything near your home that might help us find it? Michelle asked. The girl for several minutes before shouting,
Oh, I do.
Perfect, what is it? Maybe this whole lost kid ordeal would be over sooner than expected. He let out a sigh of relief,
A brown cat.
which immediately turned into a sigh of disappointment. Cats move, Michelle said.
It has really mean eyes.
Forget about the cat already. Can you think of anything that doesn't move?
I know. Monsieur Casimir is always sitting outside.
No people either.
Why not? He never ever moves from his favorite spot.
I need something easier to find, like a building or something.
Oh, there are lots of buildings, the girl exclaimed. The lane next door is a big flower garden. They're really pretty and red.
Not like that. Oh, God. No one's going to know about your neighbor's flower garden. There has to be something big and that anyone would... Michelle realized he was getting genuinely angry and stopped himself there. The girl's eyes had gotten wide and watery, and it looked like the dam could burst at any second. He closed his eyes and shook his head, disappointed in himself. Here he was, getting mad at a 3-year-old girl who was just doing her best to answer his questions.
Are you mad at me?
She asked. No, I'm not mad at you. Michelle took a deep breath, letting it out slowly to release some of his frustration. He needed to adjust his expectations. She was just a little kid, and she wasn't always going to know the right thing to say. What am I supposed to do then? He'd been raised in almost complete isolation from the world, with only adults around to interact with. Even his brothers were a good deal older than him, so he'd never been in a situation where there were so many barriers to communication. And he was utterly clueless as to how to handle it. Would he actually even be able to help the girl get home?
Gems!
Said the girl out of nowhere, interrupting Michelle's train of thought. She reached her soft, pudgy little hand up and patted his cheek with it, right beneath his eye. At which he froze, dumbstruck. 1 second, she was on the verge of tears. The next, her eyes were glimmering inquisitively. What was she even talking about? Where did gems come from? This is just how little kids are, I guess. I wondered if I was like this at her age, too.
Do your eyes hurt? She asked.
What? Why would they?
Because you've got gems in them.
Oh, so that's what she meant. His red eyes. Michelle understood now, but he wasn't very thrilled about the topic. He didn't like the color of his eyes or his hair or his skin. It was all because of them that he had to be holed up his whole life. That's just what color my eyes are. There are no gems in them, and it doesn't hurt.
Wow, they're so pretty!
Pretty. Michelle blushed a little at the compliment, despite thinking just moments ago he would rather talk about literally anything else. He received compliments on his eyes often enough from his mother and the servants, but this was the first time one had ever felt genuine, with nothing behind it. When his mother said his eyes were pretty, she was envisioning him as an angel sent down to earth. When the servants did it, it was because of their status. They were never saying it about him and only him. But the girl, she was. There was no jealousy or pity or scorn or anything else to her words. She was simply excited about eyes she thought were pretty. I think normal eyes are much prettier myself, he said without a hint of sarcasm in his voice. Okay, let's go somewhere where there's more people, to start with, he continued. Michelle stood up, hesitated for a few moments, and then extended his hand. The girl grabbed it excitedly, which made him feel like he was the only one anxious about the whole thing.
I'll come with you, mister. You need someone to help you find your brother.
You're the one who's lost, remember? Wait, mister.
Right?
She was referring to him as a boy when everybody... That's right. He's the only one who feels that he's a boy, so... Oh, that's just precious right there. They do see, I mean, it is true that some children can kind of see past certain things and they can notice things that most adults don't, so I'm glad that they included that. That's just cute right there. Michelle had just now realized that she had been calling him Mister this entire time. He'd forgotten that Georges had dressed him up like a boy, saying it was safer that way. How was he supposed to feel in this situation? Upset that she'd guessed wrong? Embarrassed? Ashamed of himself for deceiving her? The emotion that welled up in his chest was none of those, though. Instead, Michelle felt something that seemed entirely inexplicable at the time, a mixture of joy and pride at someone finally acknowledging him for who he was. A faint smile spread across his face. "Yes, I'm a boy," he said, letting each word linger on his lips. It felt so much better than any comment about his eyes. "Good on you, buddy." They wound their way down the streets, Michelle occasionally working up the courage to ask someone for directions, and after repeating the process several times, they finally made it back onto the main road. Michelle wasn't sure if it was the same road where he had gotten separated from George's, though. The capital was massive, and it seemed like every other street was called Main Street. As they stepped out into the throng, the clock struck noon. The pealing of the bell brought it with another wave of people. They looked to be artisans of all sorts, heading out for their lunch breaks. Apparently, this main street collected a bunch of workshops on it. The artisans were all big men with even bigger arms. Their profession was making things by hand, and you had to be well built to do the job as well. Or do the job well. Michelle found himself enchanted by the parade of messels, following each new one with his eyes as they passed by.
Do you want to be like them, mister?
I don't know. I haven't really thought about my future much. Michelle grimaced. It wasn't that he hadn't thought about it, but that he didn't want to. He knew all too well that he could never be an artisan, or a knight, or even a painter.
I kind of want to be a craftsman, the girl said. They can make anything they want.
Girls can't be craftsmen.
Why not?
Well, that was just how the world worked. Those are the rules, and you had to follow them. End of story. Michelle was only 10, and he knew that. He knew what a girl's role was, and soon enough, she would come to know all that as well. That growing up meant giving up on your dreams. Because again, they were in a different time period. This is not actually trying to send a message, this is literally how people thought back then. And I'm glad that they're not afraid to kind of point this out. I'm not sure exactly. At first, this didn't want to shatter a 3-year-old girl's hopes, but the more he thought about it, the more dissatisfied he felt with the system too. Why didn't he get to choose how to live with his own life? Why did he have to be stuck on this dark and narrow road his whole life? What would you want to make as a craftsman? Michelle asked to take his mind off his own dead-end future. The girl's eyes lit up.
Leather sandals and bags,
She proclaimed. Well, that's quite practical. He had assumed she would say something more cute and frivolous, like toys and sweets, or even something completely outrageous like the stars.
so we can put them out.
Put them out? Not put them on? Wait, was she? Does your family run a shop?
Yep.
Okay, so she was the daughter of a merchant. Oh my god! Which meant they were probably close. The artisans' workshops and the merchants' shops were likely to be set up near one another. Sorry. Michelle looked down to ask her if she recognized anything in the area. But before he could, she shouted, "Ah!" and let go of his hand, dashing into the bustling street. Hey, wait! If he lost sight of her now, he would probably never find the girl again. So he ran after her, slamming into a large, muscular man only a few seconds later.
Watch it!
The man shouted, his voice so powerful Michelle thought it might send him flying. His gut tightened. No one had ever yelled at him like that before, but he wasn't going to stop just because he got a little scared. He'd only met the girl earlier that day and he didn't even know her name, but he was determined to get her back to her parents. Giving up now wasn't an option for him. The girl weaved through the crowds effortlessly, like a sprite out of a story. Meanwhile, Michelle was crashing into people every 3 steps and was beginning to fear he was actually making negative progress. At long last, he made it through the river of people and caught sight of her again. But what he saw made his jaw drop. She charged at an older man latching onto his leg. The man looked down at her, his eyes narrowed as if he was frowning, or about to start crying. He was very clearly the girl's father. In addition to his relief at their reunion, he also found himself surprised at the father's reaction. His only image of a father was a strict and impassive man, not someone who would show so much concern and compassion for his daughter. His father cared more about putting on an appearance of strength than showing love for his family. He would certainly never cry over one of his kids. That would make him look weak. And also, Michelle, your dad's a bad word I really don't like to say. I think it's the C word. And Michelle had always thought that was just how fathers were. But there was nothing weak about the girl's father being so happy to have her back. Are you the one that found my little pumpkin? Her father walked over to where Michelle was standing, grabbed both of his hands and shook them up and down enthusiastically. Thank you so ever so much.
I just about had a heart attack when I saw she was gone. Oh, I'm so glad she's safe.
He said, and then kept going and going until Michelle felt like his arms were going to come off. You're welcome. That's enough. When the man finally let him go, Michelle's arms had gone numb.
I'm ever so sorry.
He said, scratching his head in embarrassment.
I got too excited.
The girl hanging off her father's leg like a koala said,
Don't get lost anymore, Daddy.
You're the one who got lost, Pumpkin.
he said with a sigh. But he was too relieved to be angry at her, and his frown turned right upside down. Michelle let out a satisfied sigh at the sight of him. He completed his mission successfully, despite the trouble he'd run into along the way, and everything was all back to normal now.
So did you bring her here all by yourself?
The man asked. Everything was all back to normal, in the sense that he was finally back at square one. He still had his original problem to deal with. I was here with my brother, he said timidly, but we got split up.
See?
See, I knew you were lost, mister.
The girl said. He wanted to say he knew exactly where he was, but he knew an adult would see right through him. So he stared down at his feet in shame, at which her father let out a hearty laugh and set a hand on his head.
We'll help you find your brother then. He's probably having a heart attack right about now, too.
He's not worried, Michelle had said under his breath, but secretly he hoped the girl's father was right. Michelle told the girl's dad they were going to a pub on the main street. Just a few minutes later, they were standing across the street from it. It was amazing how much quicker it was when you had someone who knew the area to show you the way. And it made Michelle feel that much worse about all the time he spent wandering through the back streets. Like Georges had said, the pub acted as a restaurant during the day, and it was packed to the brim with men on their lunch breaks. Eating had always been a quiet affair in Michelle's life, so this was a brand new experience for him. It felt like he'd come to a festival. Before long, they caught sight of a man pacing back and forth in front of the building. It was his brother, Georges, and when he spotted Michelle, he frantically ran over shouting, Michelle! So frantically, in fact, he tripped over his own feet and face planted halfway there. I can see that. Oh, God. But the bigger a fool Georges made of himself, the happier it made Michelle.
What did I tell you?
The girl's father said, patting him on the shoulder. Georges? Yeah? After things had settled down and they'd parted ways with the girl and her father, Georges and Michelle sat down for a late lunch. It was a very primitive meal, consisting of thin pieces of torn meat placed on slices of bread and eaten with only your hands. Michelle was having a great deal of difficulty with it. Were you worried about me? He asked, trying to be as casual as possible. Georges took a swig of some watery wine to wash down what he had in his mouth and pounded his chest a few times. He swallowed, opened his mouth, and let out an impressively colossal belch. Michelle had never seen his brother act so unrefined, but apparently that kind of behavior was allowed here. It seemed to even be the norm. The heck you talking about, kid? Of course I was. I just about had a heart attack when I saw you were gone. That was more excitement than you signed up for, huh? Mother would be very unhappy with you. I mean, yeah, I don't want to go through another one of her lectures, Georges said with a strained laugh. He looked softer and more affectionate than his usual vivacious self. But mostly I was scared something would happen to you, Michelle. Michelle's hand froze in midair, holding a piece of the meat-on-bread thing. I thought you would just laugh it off if you lost me, honestly. What do you think I am, some kind of cold-hearted monster? I'm just joking, Michelle said, sneaking a peek at his brother's pouting face over his meat. He wanted to give a nice, hearty laugh, but the most he could manage was a restrained smile. And for a child who didn't smile much at all, he'd done quite a bit of that today. Hey, Georges? Yeah? I'm sorry for disappearing on you like that. Georges' jaw dropped. Well, I'll be damned! I never thought I'd hear you apologize for anything, Michelle. What do you think I am, some kind of emotionless hobgoblin? I'm just pulling your leg. I'm sorry for not keeping a better eye on you two. Maybe if you weren't so busy looking at every single girl we walked past, that wouldn't have been a problem. Ah, come on! Don't twist the knife! That's where we're supposed to hug and say,
Yeah, we both messed up.
I don't sound like that. Why did you do that? Georges put his face in his hands and faked crying for a few seconds, and when he looked up again, he had a big smile on his face, which put a little bit of one on Michelle's as well. His father would never panic like that, no matter what happened to Michelle. He was too concerned about appearances, but his brother was different. Georges got scared of him, for him, almost cried for him, panicked so much he made a complete fool of himself. And that was enough. Georges is a good brother. Michelle didn't have to be jealous of the girl and her father. His family loved him too, and he was happy he'd had the chance to see so for himself. Hey, Georges. Yeah? Let's do this again sometime. Heck yeah! Next time Mom and Dad and our scary big brother are out. Let's go! It was extremely rare that they were all out of the house at the same time, so it was possible there would never be a next time. But Michelle still dreamed of the day it would happen. Even if it was a few years from now, as long as this wasn't the last time, he would be happy. And when he came back, he would go see that girl again. He'd go find her family shop, and if there was a pair of leather sandals in the back for sale, he'd buy them. And then he'd ask the girl what her name was. Would she even remember him in a few years? Would he even remember her in a few years? In all likelihood, neither of them would remember this day, but a little dream didn't hurt anyone. He could still feel her soft hands in his, and he could still see her big, inquisitive eyes, like two little balls of glimmering jade. Oh my god, that was so cute and wholesome. You're toying with my heart like this. Fata Morgana, you torture me in the sweetest ways with that one. Oh, that was so cute. Alright, I think that's a good place for us to end for today. So I think the next episode we're probably going to tackle Silent Night, Lonely Night, and Scarlet in the Coffee House. And if we're lucky, a ghost of an excuse. But anyway, oh my god, that was so cute. I mean, that was painful. I mean, painless. Yeah. But, oh, I like how these two kind of had a slight focus or something to do with Giselle, and that just, oh, my heart. Oh, I can't, that was so precious. Ugh. And again, that just kind of solidified that, I mean, Didier, he's not a bad brother, but if we had to really pick which brother was the best, fucking Georges, right there. But anyway, if you all like this, be sure to let me know. Thank you all so much for watching. Hopefully the audio was a little bit better, and I will see all of you guys in the next video.